Aubrey Plaza, originally from Delaware, is best known for her lead role as April Letgate on Parks and Recreation. She has produced and starred in several films, as well as performed at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater in New York. She currently lives in California and is known to dress up like a witch every Christmas. And Dan Murphy is a writer and producer who lives in Los Angeles, California, originally from Delaware. He is a graduate of the Tisch School of Arts at NYU and has been creative partners with Aubrey for over 15 years. So please help me in welcoming Aubrey, Dan, and Ellie Kemper.
Aubrey did give a heads up that she was going to scream and cackle. I didn't think she was going to, but yes, you were going to. That was a loud scream.
Honestly, it's like a nervous tick.
Bear with us. You guys, welcome, and let's hear it for the return of the Christmas witch. Excited to be here tonight. I am personally very excited because I have known Aubrey and Dan for, I want to say decades.
Oh my God.
But it's over a decade for sure, right? It's decades.
Maybe like when I was 19.
Yeah, I think that's when. And we all performed at the Upright Citizens Brigade Theater decades ago, over a decade ago, and we've known each other forever, and it's such a pleasure to be back in real life, in person, with you guys, celebrating the release of this fantastic new book. So let's open things up with a sweet little reading from Dan and Aubrey of The Return of the Christmas Witch. The Return of the Christmas Witch.
We're not going to read the whole book, it's too long. It's very long. The Christmas Witch was dreaming. For hundreds of years, buried deep in the ice, she had slept while the world changed around her, dreams swirling through her head like snowflakes. In them, she saw those she had known, Lutzelfrau, Ellesmere, Malachi, the animals of the wood, the people in the small towns she visited, her brother. Just now, Lutzelfrau was leading her through the forest to a grove of trees, where bright blazing flowers grew beneath them. The woods were as peaceful as she'd remembered, until suddenly all of the trees were on fire, burning red and orange. "Arise, Christorn, arise," Lutzelfrau was whispering to her. She looked up and saw Malachi circling overhead as the sun grew brighter. The vision faded away. She awoke, staring up at the sky as little flakes hid her eyes. The ice that had once surrounded her had melted into a pool of slush. She looked around to where her home had stood. Nothing remained now but a mound of snow. How long have I been asleep? She wondered, as she pushed herself up and looked at her reflection in the ice. She was startled to see that years of slumber had stripped the red color from her hair, for it was now white as the snow. Her once emerald eyes were a dull jade.
In her palm, she was grasping a sprig of holly that had withered and turned brown. She concentrated for a moment to revive it, but could not summon that old familiar tingling in her fingers. In fact, she could feel no magic coursing through her veins at all. It was then that she came to the sad realization. Not only was she alone, but she had lost all of her powers. A wind picked up, and the snow became heavier. She began walking many miles through the growing blizzard until she saw in the distance what appeared to be a mighty gray fortress. On its side, a single word was illuminated in red like a beacon. Kringle. Kringle.
My brother must live here, Christorn thought as she ran in the snow toward the building. She pushed open the metal door and stepped into a cavernous room. It was filled from floor to ceiling with tiny red and green packages. More traveled on a conveyor belt along the room's edge, each one stamped with the word Kringle. Christorn marveled at this modern technology, the likes of which she'd never seen before. It at last dawned on her that she must have been frozen for centuries.
Just then, a bearded young man entered the room and startled at the sight of this striking woman. She looked up at him with fear in her eyes, but before she could utter a word, the man reached for her hand. "Poor thing, you look absolutely frozen. Come, sit by my heater." Soon, Chris Dorn, wrapped in an old woolen blanket, was sipping hot cider in his small, cluttered room at the back. A large sack of presents sat at her feet. "Forgive the mess. I haven't seen anyone in months, but the stars have aligned for our meeting tonight. I'm Noah," he added, but she remained silent.
Welcome to the largest Kringle shipping center in the Southern Hemisphere, he continued proudly, met by more silence. "Surely you've heard of the Kringle Corporation." She shook her head. "Well, Kringle, you see, is the new Santa Claus. Our job is to make sure each and every present gets to its destination by Christmas Eve. You see that boat out there?" He pointed through the window toward the ocean. "Well, very soon that boat will be sailing to America with the first shipment to our Kringle headquarters in the Northeast. No need for Santa himself now that we have Kringle."
Furious thoughts raced around inside Chris Dorn's head. She couldn't believe that her brother had abandoned Christmas. Had the holiday become so focused on presents that he had forgotten her and their mutual purpose? Her disappointment slowly turned into a familiar rage. Just then, the ship blew its horn, and Noah ran to the window. "I've got to get these last packages on that ship before it takes off," Noah sighed. "Sometimes I miss the simple Christmases from when I was a boy. Don't you, miss?" But when he turned around, Chris Dorn was gone, and so was the sack of presents.
A little while later, the ship blasted its horn again and pulled out to sea. The Christmas witch was on board, hidden away in some netting. She looked back to shore. There in the snow, a mountain of packages had been set ablaze. They had been arranged to spell out words that could be read all the way from the ship. "You better watch out."
Aubrey and Dan, we all loved The Legend of the Christmas Witch so much, and as this book just came out yesterday, I'm not sure if everyone has had a chance to read it all the way through. Do you want to give us a brief overview about, obviously you just read from the book, but about what this second book sort of is about and how it continues the tale from the first?
Yes.
Good.
So the first book ends on a little bit of a cliffhanger where Chris Dorn, we sort of last see her frozen in the ice at the end, along with some of her friends. And
Not dead, just frozen.
not dead, just frozen. And as you may remember, the first story sort of takes place a long, long time ago. So with this book, we wanted to sort of have it set in present time or sometime close to present time, maybe not too distant future. So we wanted to sort of explore in this book the Christmas witch waking up in the modern world, and also sort of introduce a new character named Poppy, who is a young girl who sort of comes into contact with the Christmas witch, and they sort of end up working together, or do they?
Yes, so where we ended the little reading that we just did, Chris Dorn has now stowed away on a boat, and she is headed to America. She ends up in the Delaware Bay, which is where America, because that's where the witch ends up, in Delaware. And you know, crazy things happen in Delaware. So that's where she meets Poppy, who lives in Delaware, and she's basically on a quest to find her brother and to figure out why he basically sold Christmas to the Kringle Corporation. And she finds out when she gets to Delaware that the Kringle Corporation is run by evil elves, and they've basically turned Christmas into a package frenzy holiday where all anybody cares about are packages. It's just packages, 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 and nobody remembers any of the Christmas traditions, especially any of the old kind of Yuletide traditions that Chris Dorn is all about. And one, I think notably, is the Christmas tree. There are no Christmas trees anymore. People have totally forgotten that was even a thing, because they're just so focused on packages and presents that that they think that's what it's all about. So Chris Doran's very angry, and she's basically trying to find her brother to basically get back at him, and she decides that the only way she's gonna be able to make enough noise to get his attention is if she tries to ruin Christmas Eve. So she brews a potion in the marshes of the Delaware Bay, and she basically does a spell where she conjures up a fog, a dense, thick, creepy, scary fog, and it starts kind of seeping into Delaware and seeping into the whole country, and it makes delivering packages extremely difficult. So on Christmas Eve, there's a thick fog that has rested onto Delaware and probably like seemingly everywhere in the world, and basically everyone's saying like no, none of the packages can be delivered by the Kringle Corporation because of the fog, so Christmas is over. But then Santa, she does get his attention, and he shows up, and then they have this massive kind of, I'll say it starts off as a fight, but it's a battle. I say a battle in the sky in the fog, in the dense, creepy fog. And then I don't want to spoil it, but let's just say things get a little crazy up there, and they hash it out. But they hash it out while they're flying on reindeer, and he almost falls off the sleigh, and is she going to save him or not? And it's just complicated, but that's kind of where it goes. But yes, it's kind of, the themes are a lot about kind of, just kind of the commercialization of Christmas, and how she's very angry. She's a misunderstood villain because, yes, she wants to stop Christmas from happening, but really just because the Christmas as they know it is not the Christmas that she believes in. And Poppy kind of represents the younger generation who are more interested in nature and kind of they're curious to know, like, well, what did it used to be like? So it's kind of a mix of generations coming together to possibly like bring back the old traditions, and that's kind of what happens.
Yeah. And Chris Doran grew up loving nature. She grew up like sort of one with nature and in the woods. So this must be just crushing for her. My favorite parts of both books is when she does lose her temper, which I mentioned to you. And I love when she becomes rageful, even though I'm sorry that she's so upset. It's fun to see that happen. What are your favorite parts of the book? Or are there too many to mention? Why don't you name a few?
Well, one of my favorite parts is, so she stumbles into this kind of town Christmas fair, and she finds this animal menagerie tent in the fair, and she goes in and she sees that there's an old reindeer kind of locked up in a cage in there, and it's Donner, and Donner kind of remembers her, from as a child, but she can talk to animals. That's one of her powers. But because she's lost her powers in the beginning of the book, she has to kind of get her powers back. But then eventually she starts talking to Donner, and they have a really sweet relationship. She saves him from the animal menagerie tent, and they kind of become friends, and they hang out in the woods and eat mushrooms together. And, well, he eats mushrooms, Donner eats mushrooms, and she doesn't really like them, but she has to eat them anyway. And I just think they have like a really sweet little dynamic. So that's kind of fun. And then eventually she rides Donner into the sky, so Donner kind of becomes like her familiar. And then he helps her kind of get to Santa Claus.
Yeah, Donner's sort of like, with Santa sort of retiring possibly in the book, Donner was sort of like put out to pasture because he had a broken antler.
Yes.
So that's how he's ended up sort of in this traveling circus, for lack of a better word. And so obviously to see like him in a cage just sort of breaks her heart. But yeah, I guess that part of the book is one of my favorite parts too, because she kind of visits this very almost like creepy fair. There's like a parade in the fair that sort of like it's like Tim Burton-esque world where it's like a Christmas carnival that seems like it's
there's a darkness
to it.
There's a creepiness to it. It's Christmas, but there's something off, and everyone's eyes are a little
Yeah.
And you're like what's going on around here? There's something off about it.
That's sort of the tone of both books. It sort of reminds me of like a Grimm's-esque fairy tale, and that was my next question, which was, I know that you personally have long been, I don't want to say obsessed with, but interested in witches.
You can say it.
Witches and hats. She's obsessed. It's been a while.
I don't know what you're talking about. I don't care about
I don't care about them at all. It just is a coincidence that you read this book. But what other sorts of inspiration? Because there's so much folklore in these stories, and I don't know if it's an original story, of course, that you came up with. But what sort of inspirations did you draw on for the book? The books.
Well, I'd say one. I mean, you're really into fairy tales, and you always have been, and know so much about children's literature. Kind of growing up, I think one of my inspiration or our inspirations was kind of Scandinavian fairy tales. We read a lot of like troll. I read a lot of like Nordic troll stories, like old like like Swedish and Nordic kind of like troll tales and things like that kind of like happened in the woods. And I don't know why. I just think like there's something interesting about those stories because they were very dark for being children's stories, kind of much like Grimm's fairy tales, but the Scandinavian edge to it, there was just something almost even darker because there's just, I don't know, it's like as a child I feel like sometimes it's like, it's interesting to have things be kind of dark because it kind of, you ask a lot of questions and there's just something kind of cool about writing something for a child, but like kind of not writing down to them and just kind of like treating them like they can handle it. Obviously not too dark, but like just creepy. But yeah, so definitely Scandinavian kind of fairy tales were one inspiration.
Yeah, we both grew up in Delaware. I think we talked about this like last year, the first book. And Delaware is a very old state. Has a lot of creepy woods there, and I think maybe that influenced both of us. We were growing up like playing in the woods, and I've always liked like folklore. I've always liked A Christmas Carol, Legend of Sleepy Hollow, sort of books like that. But also like Christmas traditions. So there's a character that's kind of a minor character in our book. He's the brother of the main girl named Peter, who's sort of me because like she's sort of questioning everything and she's rebelling, and he's the one that's like just wanting to put up the Christmas decorations or like just wanting to like bake the cookies, and that was
Boring.
Did you say that was you? That was you.
He's Peter.
Oh, please don't you.
yeah.
And who? And
But she's sort of a little more like that.
I'm a little bit more like Poppy.
Yeah. You're a Poppy.
Well, I grew
You're a
up,
Peter.
one of the houses that I grew up in was literally next to a cemetery.
Oh.
So I was able to kind of like go in the cemetery and hang out, and when I was a child, and there was the woods next to the cemetery too. So I would always kind of go back in the woods, and I found these cement blocks, and I would make these kind of shelters for myself. And I would find bones and
No.
oh yes.
Wait, you would find bones from where?
I think they were animal bones, but as a child, I would take them in the house and go like, I know they're baby bones. And I would like make up stories about them, but they were probably animal bones, but I was convinced they were bones from the cemetery.
Did your parents, like, did they correct you or did they go along with it? Did they hear you?
They weren't even paying attention. They weren't. But anyway, I guess that's why I'm more like Poppy, because that's kind of how I grew up, playing in the woods with bones.
Okay. You guys, I want to ask you one quick question before we turn to the audience, just about your writing process and how you collaborate. Do you literally, just out of my own curiosity, or for my own curiosity, do you sit in a room together? I know there was a pandemic during some of it. There still is a pandemic, whatever. We're not going to get technically now, but what is it like? Who, literally, like, how do you write a story together?
I mean, I love the sort of collaboration process with Aubrey writing because we both get kind of these like ideas that like we go in the middle of the night, write down ideas, and we'll sort of pass things back and forth. Or if there's an area of the story where we're like we have this sort of general idea that needs a little work, like we'll swap areas and then sort of like work on it. But during the pandemic, when we were writing mostly the first book and then a little bit the second book, we were mostly doing it like through Zoom. But I think this last fall, Aubrey has a house that's in kind of a wooded area, and we sort of went there for inspiration. Just sort of like walk around and just,
Yeah, we went to the woods and we were
Good.
we went to a marsh and we were inspired by nature.
Okay.
But we were together too.
Yeah, right.
A lot when we write, which is nice.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be nice to like physically do, so you can talk.
Yeah.
You guys, we have collected some questions and screened them, don't worry, from the audience. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask them, okay? Okay, this one comes from Tori and Alex. I think this is for you, Aubrey.
Okay.
Do you think April would enjoy these books?
I'm assuming you mean April Ludgate. And yes, absolutely. I think, yeah, I mean, I feel like the April Ludgate, like, part of me, which is a lot of me, definitely would love the Christmas Witch and be the Christmas Witch. And, she's all about that. So, yeah, absolutely, duh.
Okay. This one comes from Ryan. What were some of your favorite children's books when you were growing up?
The Mary Poppins series was a big one for me. It was really kind of like interesting looking, more than like the stereotypical witch from the movie. I think that was like just cool for me. And, you know, illustrations that I would see of witches sort of informed how I picture different kind of characters. So.
Also the Sanderson sisters.
Yeah.
I'll just put that on there.
Timely.
Yeah. As a witch,
Yeah, can't go wrong.
Yeah.
Okay. No, we don't know who asked this question, but are there any specific childhood memories that inspired this book? I'm assuming something that actually happened to you, but interpret it as.
That's a good question. Oh, yes, there is.
Oh.
So at the very end of the book, without really giving too much away, Poppy's looking out her window on Christmas Eve, not really sure like what's happened, but she sees this sleigh light flying across the room. And when I was little, maybe about 5 or 6, my sister swears that she looked up in the sky and saw this sleigh flying in the middle of the night. And I have a memory of it, but I don't think I actually saw it.
I mean, first of all, what is a hag? And I just think hags are too personal for me. I don't know. I don't know. I think because witch, I think implies that you have powers, whereas like, I don't know if like, I think you can like kind of be, I think a witch is a hag. First of all, I think that kind of, a witch can be a hag and a hag can be a witch, let's be honest. So I think, but like I think witch just kind of opens it up more to powers and things like that, and it just ties into the story more, whereas like, but she'll end up being an old hag, as we all do. And I can't wait. I feel like when I'm an old hag, that's when I'm really gonna keep coming to you around.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'll get all the best parts.
Please change things for everyone. I mean, but yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe you've left a cliffhanger of this one, so I'm hoping that eventually there will be more and more and more, and so we'll get to the Christmas hag.
No, we're never gonna stop.
Yeah.
People want us to. We won't stop.
I have to mention that when you moved to Los Angeles, Dan, you threw a party for Aubrey, and it was called Go West Young Hag.
How did you remember that?
Because I remember that. So, yeah, so.
Your 25th birthday.
Yeah. So hag memories. Okay. Okay, well this one's really hard, you guys, but it passed the screening. What is the one question you would never want to answer? Then answer it.
Did this? I don't know. I don't know. People always ask me the one question that people always ask me that I'm like, I'm never gonna, is like, what's the worst thing you've ever done?
Don't answer that.
Why would I ever answer that? What a terrible. This question. Yeah.
Well, is there one about the book that you would want to answer about the book? Yeah, I can't think. I mean,
Pass.
I'm trying to think if there was a question that was like about the world.
What is the one question that you know? Anything that's mean-spirited.
Yes.
Well, yeah, we love
That's a good-
kindness, so
yes.
we don't want no mean-spirited questions. Okay. Well, that was, you sort of answered it. I don't know.
I would also want us to inspire a generation of like writers too, because I think I know Aubrey. When I was little, I always wanted to write a book, like a kid's book. In fact, I did when I was I think like 3 or 4. I wrote the book that I still have. So that was always like a dream of mine. But I was like, I feel like I could write a book, but I don't know. And then 30-something years later. So I think that if people have ideas for stories, Even as kids, doesn't like break them down. Who knows what
You're
we're gonna
right.
do later.
Do you remember the name of the book that you wrote when you were 3? Or
It's not
what?
haunted. I think it's Danny Goes to the Haunted House or something.
Danny Goes to the Haunted House?
It was a puppet, actually.
Well, anyway, I would want to inspire witches because no, I would want to inspire a new generation of kids that are interested in. I'm not saying like everyone be a witch and like wreak havoc, but more like I think it would be cool, and I think kids are actually interested in this. Like, you know, the planet right now, I feel is in a lot of trouble. And I feel like there's like a younger generation that I hope would be more interested in kind of like nature and like those kinds of aspects of witchcraft, because that's what interests me. I'm not like, you know, trying to like dabble in the dark arts, and like it's not about power for me. It's more about like grounding and like kind of getting to know the earth, because really early witches were you know, they were kind of like herbalists, and they were women that were healing suffering through plants and oils, and you know, and they understood the power of nature. And I think that's what's interesting about witchcraft, and I feel like this book is kind of, Chris Torn is kind of all about that. Maybe like it would inspire like young kids to like learn plants and learn, you know, how powerful plants are and how cool they are, and like, and then maybe they could dabble in little potions too. And that's fun.
I think Poppy is sort of representative of that type of
Yeah.
like kid who's fascinated with that stuff.
And I think that seems to be what drives a lot of Chris Dorn's rage, is that people, what you talked about earlier, that they have sort of forsaken the stuff of nature, and so that
Yeah.
makes her furious, which
Yeah.
rightfully so. So that's it, okay. This is sort of similar, but which witch inspires you the most? Maybe that's sort of similar.
Okay.
Or which witch inspires you the most?
I mean, and I mean this in a very loving way, but my mother, she's not here, but she would admit that she's a witch. And I feel like I have a lot of witches in my life. In fact, like I'm drawn to like witchy like women a lot. And I feel like I have Basque witch blood coursing through my veins, and I think, I don't know, I feel like my mom kind of like has a witchiness, and she inspired me because she's kind of like weird and kind of quiet, but like also very powerful.
Yeah. Oh, that's sweet.
I mean, I was always fascinated as a child by like Salem witches, and then we found out we were related to some of them or something. So,
What did you say? You're related?
yeah. I think a lot of people are. I mean, they have
I guess.
sense, but well, you're related to Basque.
I'm a,
But I do think like that whole, you know, phenomenon is like, fascinating. So I think those women that were persecuted are interesting and inspirational.
Okay, and now, why Christmas and not another holiday?
That's a very good question. I think one of the things that we were talking about early on when we were talking about this idea is how in America, there's not really an American kind of traditional female character for Christmas other than Mrs. Claus, which like, I'm like, Mrs. Claus is cool, but like, she's like the wife, and it's always like her kind of like in relation to Santa Claus, and it's a little bit like, she's more than that, probably, but I don't really know a lot about her. But in Italy, there's this figure called La Befana, which is it's like a witch. It's an Italian witch character that's kind of in Italian folklore, and the kids kind of all grow up knowing about La Befana, and La Befana has like a whole story, and she like shows up, and she's kind of like a hag. She's like an old, like kind of Italian hag that like sweeps a broom and puts like coal in your shoes or something, and she's not evil, but she's kind of scary, and I just thought like, well, that's not fair. Like America needs like a witch, like a Christmas witch too. Like they can't have all the fun, and like, so I just thought it would be fun to have like a female kind of, another female character in Christmas that kids could grow up with, and you know, yeah, be scared of or like or whatever. So that it doesn't have to be all about like, you know, Santa Claus.
Yeah. And I like how you, in this book, I feel like Christopher, Kris Kringle,
Mhm.
is like several times just leaving his sister. He's like, I have to go, bye, and he keeps going, and it's like he's the flake.
I know.
Yeah. So I don't know.
I'm not saying like down with Santa Claus, but
But
it's
it's-
also
but
just
he-
like,
but maybe he is.
like, just, come on.
I know. He keeps like abandoning her.
I know, like, what is he doing? What does he have to do?
Well, that's it. Right. She's very beneath the eyes.
Yeah.
You guys, that is all the audience questions that I have on my cards.
Okay.
So, I think, do I hand this back to Joe now?
Well,
Oh, yeah.
before Joe.
Oh, yeah.
But no,
Yes.
I just before no Joe, come. But I just want to say thank you, Ellie. Thank you so
Oh,
much.
Ellie.
I love you.
I love
And
No, I was sad that she lost her red hair.
But
it's
it's gonna patch her.
Okay, oh good, okay. Well, that was my other question. There is a cliffhanger in this one. I really hope to see a third book in this. I'm gonna call it a series. Okay, good.
But yes,
Yeah.
you will.
I would like to thank Aubrey and Dan and give that hand for them because we love these stories.
Okay, I guess we're gonna transition into the other thing now.
Thank you, Ellie, Aubrey, and Dan. Thank you so much for that conversation. Thank you all for coming. Let's give it once more. Okay. So, this is how it's going to work. When you came in, you were given a ticket with a letter on it. We're going to call up groups by letter for the meet and greets. You're going to get your photo. We're going to start with A and go through the rest of the alphabet as one does the alphabet. Don't move. Just stay seated until your group is